This is the IBJ podcast for the week of August 19th, 2019. I'm Mason King. If you live in the Indianapolis area, chances are you have been to the Children's Museum. It's the largest children's museum in the United States and one of the biggest drivers of tourism in central Indiana, with more than 1 million visitors every year. Its front door is at 30th and Meridian, but the museum is one of the largest landowners in the Midtown area between its campus and nearby parking lots. And over the last decade, it has taken control of all of the land on the west side of Meridian between 30th and 32nd Street. In 2012, for example, it bought 2 apartment properties for $1 million each. The 8-story Drake, built in 1928 at 3060 North Meridian, and the 3-story Whitestone complex at 3140 North Meridian. In 2014, the museum bulldozed the Whitestone, which at that point was vacant, and on that property now sits part of the museum's Sports Legends Experience Activity Park, which opened last spring. The Drake is still standing, but probably not for long. Late last month, the museum announced that it plans to demolish the Drake. It vacated tenants from the building in 2016 due to its deteriorating state and the need for a top-to-bottom rehab. The museum says it went to great lengths over more than 2 years to find a viable solution for reviving the building, but that it had trouble getting any interest from developers. The decision to do away with the Drake has disappointed local historic preservationists and neighborhood leaders, some of whom are holding out hope for a reprieve. Now, museum officials have said the cost of renovation is prohibitive and they're not willing to sell the building. IBJ's Hayleigh Colombo has been covering the story and has a great piece in this week's IBJ about the controversy. And here she is in the studio to walk us through it. Hayleigh, it's a great story.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Now, before we get going, I do want to say that we asked local historic preservation experts and museum officials to join us on the podcast, and they all declined. But you did speak with or correspond with them for the story.
Absolutely, yes.
So tell me about the Drake. If I'm walking up Meridian, what is it that I see?
So it's a pretty towering building, and it has some very unique architectural features. It's an example of collegiate Gothic architecture, and there are leaded glass windows and several original features, including the elevator, very ornate molding and trim on the outside. It's just a very, I guess, menacing in a good way.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of Gothic in that way, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I think some of the apartments still have fireplaces, back when apartments had fireplaces.
Yes, they have these penthouse apartments on, I think it's the top 2 stories of the building, that have pretty dynamic views of the city and just some great features.
Now, before we go any further here, I want to make a distinction. Now, the Drake is a beautiful building, but it doesn't have any kind of official designation that would protect it against demolition. And it's not in an area that has been officially designated a local historic district, like Heron Morton Place or the Old North Side. Because if it were, the demolition would have to be approved, I think, by the Indianapolis Historic Preservation Commission. Now, it was, my understanding, is rated as outstanding in the Marion County Historic Sites and Structures Survey in 1991, which means it's eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, although it is not on the National Register of Historic Places.
Droves and droves of historic, beautiful structures like this are also not protected, even ones who are eligible, like the Drake, to be on the National Register. Many of them are not.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, Indianapolis has done a great job over the last probably 50 years and kind of leading the way, certainly for Indiana and probably the Midwest, in preserving buildings and helping people find ways to fix them. But it still is hard to tell an owner of a building that they can't do something with a building unless it is in a local historic district, as I'm aware.
The museum owns the building.
Mm-hmm.
They can demolish it.
So what is it that the museum wants to do with that property?
So here's where things also get interesting, and this, I think, has prompted a lot of other concern from the community, because the short-term plan for the Drake is to convert it into parking. So that was not popular from many, urbanists and people who are thinking about sort of the design of our city. Long-term, the museum has said that it wants to put programming there. It wants to maybe expand its exhibits or other activities or whatnot there. So essentially, It does seem like they have another plan for the site that they're probably just not ready to talk about yet. But yes, they want to convert it into parking for the short term. Essentially, they've said to alleviate neighborhood congestion.
I remember with the Whitestone building, when they initially said that they were going to demolish it, what they said at the time was fairly vague about wanting to, have some sort of outdoor feature. I mean, what they did end up with was this giant sports activity park. And the Whitestone property, I think, is part of the golf course, the Pete and Alice Dye designed miniature golf course. So, I mean, they have in the past, in these kind of situations, found uses, that certain further the museum's mission.
Sure, absolutely.
Now, the museum has said that the Drake is beyond saving, essentially. I mean, why? What does it need?
It needs, according to the museum, a pretty much complete overhaul. HVAC, windows, the elevator. I mean, it needs, all sorts of electrical systems and other just like intense systems work. And obviously, as anyone who knows anything about home repair knows, the stuff that you don't see is the most expensive stuff.
And the museum saw this apparently and instituted some kind of process or started some kind of process to determine whether or not the Drake could be reused. How did that work?
The museum was a little bit vague. I mean, they did talk about that they convened a process over the last couple of years to explore. I asked who was on that committee or who was on that, sort of board of people to explore these things, and they did not release that to me. So
you did speak with someone, I think, in the neighborhood who was part of the process.
Mm-hmm. I just happened upon, I was speaking to Lee Riley Evans, who is the director of the Mapleton Fall Creek CDC, and she said she was on that. So neighborhood leaders were definitely a part of it, and I know Indiana Landmarks was a part of it, but essentially they convened this group to see what the options would be. At some point, they put out an RFP to
request for a proposal.
Yes, to get solicitations from developers or whatnot to see what sorts of things they could do. At one point, they explored maybe they would make a hotel for museum visitors or something like that, apartments, mixed use, that sort of thing. And according to the museum, those efforts were not successful. A lot of people didn't even respond to the RFP. Like one person put out a proposal that they said wasn't workable, but they essentially said this was sort of a failed process to find anyone to reuse it. So there's a little bit of, I guess, disagreement maybe about this RFP process, because it seems like from folks I spoke to, including Indiana Landmarks, they think that the RFP was too restrictive, that it discouraged developers from really putting forth meaningful proposals. Now, I have no way of knowing that, because I asked the museum to send me the RFP or let us look at it, and they said no.
Now, who is interested in trying to come up with solutions to save the building? And you mentioned Indiana Landmarks, which is sort of the statewide organization that promotes historic preservation and has been active in Indiana for a long time as one of the country's largest, I think, statewide organizations. Yeah,
so Indiana Landmarks seems to be sort of leading the charge to see what they could do. There's also just a group of local preservationists who feel strongly that this building should not go away. I'm a somewhat recent Indianapolis resident. I moved here in 2008 for college. My understanding from talking with folks is that Indianapolis doesn't have the greatest legacy when it comes to, at least in the past, like protecting some of our architectural gems. So I think people are sensitive to that. Here, it's like there's not a ton of these buildings to go around. Mm-hmm. And there are folks that are just like really not liking the idea of it going to parking. There's literally a song lyric about this, which
Wait a second, what?
You know the song that's like, they paved paradise to put up a parking lot? It has sort of been in my head while I've been writing this story.
Yeah, I think you're thinking about Big Yellow Taxi by Joni Mitchell.
Yes.
That predates this controversy by about 50-some years.
Yep. Predates the controversy, but always relevant.
Also, I know that you spoke with the Indianapolis Historic Preservation Commission President Bill Brown, who also, I think, is pretty intensely interested in somehow coming up with a solution here.
Yes, I did speak with Bill Brown, and he wants to talk with the museum, continue conversations between the museum and the city and preservation officials, and just see if there's some sort of solution.
Hey, let's take a quick break while I get the song out of my head. This is the IBJ Podcast.
The IBJ Podcast is sponsored by Krieg DeVault, a trusted and dynamic law firm representing a wide variety of local, regional, and national clients. Committed to each other and to every client, Krieg DeVault prides itself on integrity, professionalism, respect, and excellence. Financial institutions, global manufacturers, national healthcare providers, and successful organizations of all sizes and market focus rely on Krieg DeVault to create innovative and successful business solutions. Connect today at www.kriegdevault.com.
We're back with the IBJ podcast. I'm Mason King. I'm here with Hayleigh Colombo, and we're talking about the controversy over the Drake apartment building, which its owner, the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, wants to demolish. Now, from what I gather, there are a few issues here for the people who are interested in saving the Drake. One, it's a beautiful building, as we've discussed, and people would like to be able to preserve it. Two, they really don't want to see parking there, to the extent anybody ever wants to see parking anywhere, for however long it would remain parking before the museum tries to do something else with it. But three, the Drake is along the route for the Red Line, which launches next month. And the city and local transportation and housing advocates are very interested in making sure that there's affordable housing along this rapid transit line. And I take it that they see this as a missed opportunity of sorts.
Absolutely. I think you hit on all three issues that are going on here. There are a lot of folks that see that building right by a Red Line stop as a prime spot for, making that into some mixed income or affordable housing. INHP, Indianapolis Neighborhood Housing Partnership, they have this equitable transit-oriented development fund that I've written about a few times for IBJ, launched earlier this year. Essentially, there's a fund. The city has contributed to the fund. They're trying to buy up properties along the Red Line to start affordable housing, mixed income housing projects, just to make sure that all of the property along the Red Line doesn't become uber expensive. The whole goal of it is to connect people with jobs and to reduce transportation costs and make sure that people have connectivity and accessible transportation here. So essentially, INHP was interested in buying the Drake.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. But
for that purpose, for creating...
For that purpose,
mixed income, affordable housing.
Mm-hmm. But essentially, as INHP told me, we can't be a buyer if they won't be a seller. So, and the museum has said they're not interested in selling the building.
What are the alternatives that proponents of saving the building, what are some of the ways that it could be saved? I know one of them, I still have trouble wrapping my head around it, is to pick it up and move it.
Yes. I also have trouble wrapping my head around it, but I have seen this happen in other places. Again, I'm not an engineer.
I've seen it happen with houses.
Oh, definitely.
2 or 3 4-story houses.
Right.
But, that's a big building.
That was one idea. A couple of people floated that to me, and people that are not, shall we say, unrealistic people.
It was intriguing to me when you passed that by the leadership of the museum. They said that they would be willing to look at something like that.
Yeah, they would be.
Obviously, it must be possible.
It must be possible. Yeah. But the other option, so selling it, picking it up and moving it, however you would do that. And then the third option is essentially to, force the museum to make this work in some way. The city has said that they would be open to providing some financial incentives to make this work possibly. And then there's the element of stopping the museum from being able to tear it down.
And that's one of the things that I think is really interesting about kind of the next steps in this process. That apparently the city might be able to impede the process maybe a couple different ways, one of which is the necessary request for rezoning the property. How does that work?
In order to change the use of the property, the museum has to get it rezoned. The city could not allow the rezoning to be parking. However, that doesn't save the building, right? They could demolish the building and then say, hey, we want to do parking here, we want to do a rezone, and the city could just say no.
But there also could be a scenario in which the building could be protected.
Even though the building is not a locally protected building, the Indianapolis Historic Preservation Commission could essentially just vote to do that, to make it a protected building and just be like, yeah, no, we don't want to see this come down. There are discussions ongoing about whether or not the IHPC would do that. It is pretty rare.
And Bill Brand did say it was on the table.
Yes.
As I recall, right. Yeah, this does not happen a lot, but it has happened.
It has happened. And there's a couple of prominent examples. In the early 2000s, essentially, the IHPC voted to protect the Askren House, which is the second oldest house in Indianapolis. That house was saved via action by the IHPC, as well as an old church right downtown. It's like across near the library. The IHPC voted to protect it, and it is now condos with the original, the church. Look, it still looks like a church. Like
I think that the back end has...
The back end is like modern.
Modern.
Like everyone has driven past this thing a million times.
Yeah, but I think what you would call the sanctuary.
Yes.
That whole area, a very significant portion of the building just looks like a church.
Yeah.
So what happens next? Do we have a sense? There could be IHPC action on this. Is there something else?
Yeah, I just checked with the city today, actually, to say, is anything what's the update? Essentially, the city is still sort of waiting to hear back from the Children's Museum. I'm assuming the talk about incentives, that the city told me about is probably what those conversations are about. But we don't know yet. I talked with several historic preservationists who said for people who are concerned about this, they need to contact the museum. And I asked the city as well, what should people do if they're concerned, or what should people do if they are interested in this? The city said contact the museum.
All right, well, let's check back in a few weeks and see what happened.
Thank you.
My thanks again to Hayleigh. Again, you can read her story in the latest edition of IBJ, along with some other pretty strong entries this week. Mickey Shuey reports that Indianapolis Public Schools is about to embark on a comprehensive analysis of 71 of its properties, and these are schools and other buildings, to determine which ones should be closed or sold. Sam Quinn gets ahead of a big contract to be awarded by the Department of Education that could bring hundreds of jobs to Fishers. And Anthony Shetley explores troubles at New York-based Vox International that could lead it to sell locally based subsidiary Klipsch, which has been a bright point for the company in recent years. You can read all about it in this week's print edition of IBJ or online at ibj.com. And remember to have full and unfettered access to all of IBJ's award-winning business content. Just hit the subscribe button. Thanks again for making time for the IBJ podcast, which is edited by Leslie Weidenbender. I'm Mason King, and we'll be back again next week.